The material we're looking at today assesses the meaning of the final 3 games for the Kansas City Chiefs after their playoff elimination, really digging into integrity and long-term roster decisions.
Right.
And it's immediately compelling. You really zeroed in on that core conflict. The professional duty to show integrity versus the temptation to just coast. It's a great place to start.
It is, but I think the power of that conflict is it's a bit buried right now. We need to flip the whole script. The piece really needs to sharpen its focus by hitting us with that core human, that emotional conflict right away, instead of, building up to it.
Okay, so you're saying the current structure kind of saves the best for last.
It holds back Travis Kelce's really powerful quote on integrity until the very end.
Exactly. And the opening is just too, declarative. It's just telling the Chiefs to avoid this mentality, but it doesn't show us why that's so hard.
It doesn't show the struggle. And if you're going to make integrity the central theme, then you have to frame the whole piece as a moral test from the very first sentence.
Right.
I mean, we're suggesting a full restructure of the opening. Lead with that internal human thing, the player's choice, before you get to the external stuff, like the schedule. The whole critique should frame these last games not as some boring obligation, but as a real personal test of character.
That makes a ton of sense from a storytelling angle. You want the reader hooked on the dilemma from the jump. Right now, it reads a bit like a logistical report that, eventually finds a philosophical point.
It should be the other way around. I mean, look at the weight of Kelce's words when he talks about his commitment. That's the emotional gravity the piece needs to start with.
Okay, so let's make this concrete. What does that actually sound like in practice?
Well, instead of starting with the dry fact that they're out of the playoffs, you could open by paraphrasing Kelce or just synthesizing his whole vibe. Something like, for the Chiefs, the final 3 games aren't about the playoffs. They're about integrity, a professional's commitment to his work.
I like that a lot. It sets the stakes immediately. It's not about football, it's about something bigger.
You use the power of his sentiment, that I signed up to be a Kansas City Chiefs line, to set the tone instantly. And that creates this suspenseful contrast with that whole dynasty and decline narrative before you even mention who they're playing.
So you start with the emotional dilemma.
You establish the stakes of character, and then you layer on the schedule and the organizational fallout.
And that shift just instantly elevates the whole thing. It goes from a tactical breakdown to a story about character under pressure.
Yes.
It centers the player's experience, the emotional cost. The reader's immediately thinking, okay, are they going to pass this test?
You've really tapped into the true conflict here. It's promise versus trauma. This piece is about whether words can heal a historical wound, not just about 3 football games. So those words have to hit first.
That is a powerful way to frame it. And once you establish that high emotional standard, it leads us right into the business side of things, which I think is our second big point.
Right.
The material does a strong job linking these losses to the 2026 roster, saying that losing to teams like the Raiders and Titans has a real impact.
It does, but that connection between losing to, bad teams and the specific 2026 roster consequences, it needs a much more robust argument. It needs to be more explicit.
Yeah, I can see that gap. The phrase may impact the composition of the roster. It's a little weak, a little too broad, and assumptive. It doesn't have that transactional punch you need.
Right. It feels like I'm having to do the work for the author. I'm left asking, okay, but how exactly does losing to a 4-win Raiders team change the general manager's thinking? Can we make that connection feel, immediate and irreversible?
So we need to clearly spell out the transactional risk, the dollar signs involved.
Our suggestion is that the material should define these last games as an explicit litmus test, where it's not even about the final score, it's about effort and professional urgency. That's what determines a player's future contract. Their intrinsic drive becomes this really expensive data point.
Let's really focus on what these games provide to management and to other teams, because that's the real leverage.
Exactly. What do these games prove? A bad performance against teams with, 4 combined wins? That signals a lack of professional urgency. And that's a huge red flag when you're deciding who gets a big new contract. If you want a $10 million a year deal, you can't look like you're mailing it in.
I hear you, but I do wonder if we risk overstating the weight of just 3 games when a GM has, 60 games of tape to look at. Is that something we should worry about? Or is the specific context here, the lack of motivation, the one thing they're watching for?
That's a really fair challenge. But think about the context. The Chiefs are running on fumes here. These 3 games are the only data points left that show a player's raw, intrinsic drive when the pressure of the playoffs is gone.
Hmm.
Every GM knows what a guy does when Mahomes is throwing him the ball in a championship game. What they don't know is what he does when the bright lights are off and the season's over. That's what management pays top dollar for. That suggests sustainability.
Okay, so we have to make that financial consequence completely unavoidable for the reader. Argue that a free agent's leverage just plummets if his last performance on tape shows low motivation, especially when the stars aren't there to cover for him.
Yes, it moves it from just a generic concern to a specific business impact. We're showing that this isn't just morally bad, it's economically damaging for the player and the team. It's a character evaluation dressed up as a football game.
That's incredibly actionable. Yeah, that transforms that whole section from a weak assumption into a really strong, evidence-based argument for high stakes.
Totally.
Okay, moving into our third area. The material does a great job identifying those competing narratives. The lucky year theory versus the dynasty in decline. That contrast is strong. It really sets the stage well.
It does, but building on that, to really maximize the power of that argument, the language used to describe the potential losses needs to be, more vivid, less generic. It needs to underscore just how severe that narrative risk is.
I agree completely. The weakness is relying on softer phrasing, like saying a loss to the Broncos wouldn't be a surprise, or that losing to the Titans and Raiders would be another story. It dilutes the severity. It pulls the punch.
It really does. You need to articulate the sheer embarrassment of losing to 2 teams that have a combined 4 wins. That's a damning detail that has to be leveraged.
So is there a risk that by using polite, neutral language, we're kind of overlooking the visceral damage these losses would do rhetorically?
That's exactly it. This isn't just about losing a game. It's about legitimizing the entire counter-narrative. Our suggestion is to use precise, punchy language to define those consequences. Emphasize the reputational damage from losing to teams that are, frankly, struggling badly.
I do worry a little, though. If we use language like catastrophic proof points, does that sound too alarmist? We want to maintain that analytical tone. Can we get that punch without losing objectivity?
I think we can, absolutely. You do it by tying the strong language directly to the statistical reality the author already gave us. Those 4 combined wins.
Right.
When you lose to those teams, you don't just lose, you hand the opposition a weapon. So instead of saying a loss would only feed the decline narrative,
You'd say what instead?
something like handing incontrovertible evidence to the skeptics. Or even stronger, legitimizing the systemic decline narrative by falling to teams fundamentally defined by failure. You have to hit the reader with the true cost. It's not just a loss, it's a receipt the haters can cash in for years.
That rhetorical escalation is key. So for the Titans and Raiders, you make the contrast sharper. You frame these games as a battle for minimum respect.
Exactly, against opponents who should not threaten the integrity of a supposed dynasty.
It reinforces the idea that these losses aren't just data points. They are, as you said, undeniable, catastrophic proof points for the other side.
And that's where the originality comes from. Just elevating the terminology immediately boosts the significance of the entire piece. It goes from a standard game preview to this high-stakes drama about reputational risk.
Absolutely. It makes the reader feel the weight of those 4 combined wins. That stat is devastating, and the language has to reflect that.
Look, this material is already strong. It's rooted in a great core conflict that was identified perfectly. But these refinements will give it the impact it really deserves.
We've covered a lot of ground today. So to summarize the major opportunities here for greater impact.
Yeah, let's do it.
First, you've got to resequence the material. Lead immediately with that emotional core of integrity, using Kelsey's perspective as the hook that sets up the whole moral dilemma.
Second, strengthen that causal link between poor performance in these games and the real, concrete 2026 roster impact. Make the financial and professional cost of mailing it in explicit. unavoidable.
And finally, refine the language, heighten that rhetorical contrast, and really emphasize the potential embarrassment of losing to these struggling teams. Use vivid terms that match the gravity of the reputational damage.
These are sharp, actionable suggestions. The piece has tremendous potential, and these changes just focus its energy perfectly.
We genuinely believe that everyone should challenge themselves to improve their work through constructive criticism. We invite you to implement these suggestions and submit your revised work back in again for a follow-up critique.